I struggled for a long time to make this review. As a fan of Roman history and Paradox Interactive's grand strategy games, this should be a slam dunk for me, but it's not. People often talk about how Paradox have kind of rough launches with limited content and bugs and design issues, and while I felt that way about Hearts of Iron 4 and Stellaris at their launches, I feel like Imperator really takes it to the next level. My first game I started as Rome. Being the premier nation of the game, I expected a fairly in-depth experience that it just does not have. There's minor nitpicks you can have, like the lack of two consoles, or how you can't just place a long road in succession. Instead, you have to place the roads one by one at a time from province to province, frustratingly trying to build these roads that are supposed to be such a core feature of the Roman Empire all the way to its destination. But these are not my biggest problems with this game. Playing as Rome should really feel like the definitive experience to Imperator Rome. Especially for new players, it should be filled with content, but it's not. I quickly began to run into repeated events, and there's just not a whole lot to really do with Rome. You don't really get a very interesting experience either, because starting off as Rome is just incredibly dull. Perhaps if you've never played a Paradox game before, this might be a good start for you because it's super easy. But even in games like Europa Universalis 4, which has playing as, say, France, which is also pretty easy, but there's a lot more depth and intrigue to it. But in Imperator Rome, there's nothing to do. You get a ton of vassals, you've got no real challenges, no real rivals, the AI isn't really good enough to put up a big enough fight, and fighting Carthage is just a complete joke. You start out with such a strong economy and amount of provinces that there's just nothing to stop you. It's pointless, and I got bored pretty quickly through playing the campaign. The tutorial also has you play as Rome, and it's complete garbage. It does a really poor job at introducing the game's mechanics to you. It kind of just throws you in there and gives you like 5 billion of each resource, so you never run out. You can just do anything you want. It's just a giant sandbox with no real challenge or rules to it. Of course, you can start a game in the tutorial and try and continue it through as a regular campaign, but why would you? Because it's such a joke and doesn't do a very good job at really introducing you to the game's mechanics. You would think after the praise and success that Stellaris had for its more gradual tutorial system that introduces you to the game's mechanics while you're actively playing it, they would try and adopt something like that, but they don't. Now, from a gameplay standpoint, Imperator plays a lot like Europa Universalis mixed with elements of the other Paradox games. Countries are mostly managed through mana, and while I've never really had a problem with it in other Paradox games, I feel like Imperator actually takes it to the level where it actually is a problem. It's just such a frustrating and bad design in this game. There's so many different types of power, like this oratory power for promoting civilians up to different areas. There's also religious power, which can be used to convert pops over to your religion or to gain stability, and some of these just have so few uses that they're completely pointless and they're so unsatisfying. Have a rival that doesn't like you? Bribe them with power. You got problems with stability? Increase it instantaneously. Want to convert pops from one thing to another? Instantaneously convert them. There's no real rewarding sense of satisfaction from this game of making long-term decisions and planning about your country. It's hard to get attached to it when everything just sort of flies off like this instantaneous. Research is kind of broken down into these different systems. There's the invention system, which is a cool idea, but I don't really like how it's structured. Basically, you get a certain amount of points, and then you can use them to purchase different inventions as you gain new tech levels. The inventions can be kind of bland, though. It's kind of just slight modifiers like better infantry abilities or stuff like that, tax collection rates. But I don't really like it because you can sort of get them all anyways, so it kind of makes the whole thing kind of feel pointless. You're not really making meaningful choices. The research is also handled by appointing characters to study particular things. However, you don't really gain anything particularly interesting, unfortunately. There's no new units or buildings to construct, so it just all kind of feels pointless, really, to be honest with you. It lacks the sense of the research improvements that you would gain from Europa Universalis. And I think that's kind of a story about this game in general, is that it takes all these elements from other Paradox games, but it does them worse. The game also, kind of like I mentioned before, feels rather bland when it comes to improving your nation due to the instantaneous nature of how things just cost mana and just sort of happen with upgrading population from slaves into freemen or into citizens or research, and you just press a button. But what I really dislike is that there's only 4 buildings in the game. There's a granary, barracks, fort, training camp. So it just really lacks the depth of EU4's provincial development. The choices are pretty basic. Well, you want to improve your population? Build a granary. Want to defend against incoming attackers? Build a fortress. Want to get more manpower? Build a training camp. There's no real interesting choices here because it just feels so restrictive. And it doesn't feel like you can really build interesting provinces. You can't really develop them into something cool. I feel like it'd be a lot more fun if you could build things like aqueducts or temples or other things that could really give you meaningful improvements here. It'd be really awesome, and that's something that EU4 kind of has. There's a ton of different buildings you construct that make each area feel very different. It's also something that Stellaris does really well nowadays. You can improve different areas and planets and star bases to really have a meaningful effect on your empire, and that's something this game really should have as well. Going along with the theme that it does everything worse from other games, there's a character system that just feels like a watered down, poor version of CK2. I love that there's internal politics with characters in your realm, but they don't feel particularly interesting. Sometimes families will get pissed off that they don't feel like they're giving fair treatment, so you have to give them more money or different things or appoint them positions, but most of the problems can be fixed really easily by pressing one button to make somebody happy or to bribe them, so it really lacks the scheming and intrigue of Crusader Kings' character system. The game also has a civil war system, but I so rarely fought them that I forgot that it was even a feature. And that's a real shame given that Roman history in particular, this game is called literally Imperator Rome, was faced with tons of civil war and internal strife. You feel like this should be a core mechanic of the game and not just a complete joke. Now, I know that I've been complaining a lot about Imperator, but it's not all that bad. The combat does feel a little bit improved in some aspects over previous Paradox games. There's some interesting choices between tactics, so you can basically pick different tactics going into a battle that will be better or worse depending on your comp and also the enemy comp. And there's a ton of different units to choose from, like light and heavy infantry, light and heavy cavalry, chariots, elephants, archers, and more. It reminds me in that way of Stellaris, where you can design your fleets to counter your opponent, and I really like that, how in Imperator you can also do that as well by scoping out your opponent, figuring out what tactics they're using, what their army comp is, and then counter it. That's a cool, awesome mechanic that adds interesting tactical depth to the game. They've also done a pretty great job with the terrain. I like how the map is laid out. There's a lot of mountains and other natural obstacles that provide interesting choke points and barriers to war. It uses the Europa Universalis fort system for locking down territory, so you can strategically place these around different natural formations, and I like that. What I don't like though about the combat is the loyalty system. Each army needs a general who is a character from your nation that's put in charge of the army. The loyalty system is supposed to punish you by making generals basically gain loyalty from their soldiers over time, but it's kind of just a joke because you can reassign them or unassign them from armies, so you don't even have to worry about it at all because you just go to war, fight, then you unassign the general, then you don't have to worry about the loyalty mechanic, making the whole thing completely useless. It feels like a cool mechanic too because basically as they gain loyalty, they can refuse orders or pursue their own agenda, and if they don't have loyalty to you, they might just try and start a civil war or something like that. And these are cool, interesting things that really kind of fit in with Roman history in general and the Civil War nature. But it's just not that well developed in this game, and it feels like a giant oversight in how they did this, where you can just basically cast generals away, so you don't even have to deal with the mechanic. I did have some complaints about the performance, but fortunately Paradox Interactive has fixed that in recent patches. And from a graphical standpoint, Imperator is definitely their best game yet. The map is absolutely gorgeous, and they've added some really cool, incredible details to the terrain, like mountains and even little touches like the cities. Just look so much more developed than they do in, say, Europa Universalis or Crusader Kings. The provinces are just so much more fun to watch. And there's sweet little graphics for when a battle's occurring, your army, your little soldier dude that's on the map will stab at each other and dodge and block, and that's really awesome. It really makes the map feel so much more alive. The music is overall pretty good. I like the themes and the way it flows. It sounds great, and some of it's been playing during this video, but I wish there was more songs. It's just not a very long soundtrack at all, so unfortunately it gets very repetitive fast. Overall, Imperator Rome is one of the most disappointing game launches I've ever played. It feels underdeveloped, poorly thought out, and with an overuse of things like mana and other mechanics that just don't make any sense and are done so much better in their other games. There just needs to be so much more content here, differences between playing fractions. Currently you can play as tribes, monarchies, and republics, but they don't feel any different at all. They all play exactly the same. Fortunately, Paradox has given us a pretty long roadmap planned for the future of this game, so I hope that they can really refine this into a polished experience, because right now, it is a turd. It is just not fun to play, it's boring, it's dull, and it's inferior to every one of their other products. And like I said before, I had complaints about Hearts of Iron 4 and Stellaris at launch, but those games at least were fun. I still got like 60 to 100 hours out of both those at launch despite all their problems. But with this game, I just can't see myself playing more than 20 hours. It's just really boring and not fun to play. And so I would not recommend this game at all right now. And I don't even know what to rate it. If I had to rate it on a scale right now, I would probably go with a 5. It's just super bland and average. There's just nothing in here that really excels at all. Sure, you can play through a game and it might do better things than some other inferior products from other companies, but it just doesn't match any of the other grand strategy games from Paradox. And that's why this game is just not fun at all to play. So hopefully in the future, they'll actually fix this game.